The rain came down so hard that Danny Cole could not see the road anymore. His truck shook with every gust of wind and the radio kept repeating the same warning. Category 5 hurricane. Seek shelter immediately. Do not attempt to travel, but Danny had no choice. He was 40 miles from the nearest town, deep in the Louisiana bayou, and the storm had changed direction 6 hours ago. No one had expected it to turn this way. No one had time to warn him. Danny was a wildlife biologist. He had been out in the swamps for 3 days, counting alligator nests and collecting water samples. His phone had died on the second day, and his satellite radio had stopped working that morning. By the time he reached his truck and heard the emergency broadcast, the hurricane was already upon him. He drove slowly, fighting the wheel as the wind tried to push his truck off the narrow road. Trees bent sideways around him. He saw a metal shed fly through the air like a piece of paper. The world had gone and violent, and Danny knew he was running out of time. Then something large hit his truck. He heard the crash of metal and felt the vehicle spin. When it stopped, he was facing the wrong direction, and steam was rising from the hood. He tried the engine. It made a terrible sound and then went silent. Danny sat there for a moment, breathing hard, understanding that he was now going to die unless he found shelter in the next few minutes. He grabbed his backpack, his flashlight, and his emergency kit. Then he opened the door and stepped into the storm. The wind nearly knocked him down immediately. He had to lean forward and walk at an angle just to move. The rain hit his face like tiny needles. He could barely keep his eyes open. Danny moved away from the road looking for anything solid. A building, a concrete structure, anything that would not blow away. He walked for what felt like an hour but was probably only 10 minutes. His legs were heavy with mud. His clothes were soaked through. He was beginning to accept that this swamp would be his grave. Then he saw it, a concrete wall half buried in the ground covered with vines and moss. It looked old, very old. There was a metal door set into the wall, rusted but solid. Danny pushed through the vegetation and grabbed the handle. It would not move. He pulled harder. Nothing. The wind screamed around him and he could hear trees cracking and falling nearby. Danny took out his small crowbar from the emergency kit. He jammed it into the gap between the door and the frame. He pushed with all his strength. For a terrible moment, nothing happened. Then the rust gave way with a loud crack, and the door swung open. Danny fell inside and immediately turned to pull the door closed behind him. It took all his weight to shut it against the wind. Then there was silence. Not complete silence because he could still hear the hurricane roaring outside, but compared to what he had just escaped, it felt like peace. Danny lay on the concrete floor, breathing hard, letting his heart slow down. He was alive, for now at least. After a few minutes, he sat up and turned on his flashlight. He was at the top of a concrete stairway that led down into darkness. The walls were plain concrete, old but solid. It looked like some kind of bunker, maybe from the Cold War, when people built shelters everywhere in case of nuclear attack. Danny had heard there were many forgotten bunkers scattered across Louisiana, built and then abandoned when the fear faded. He stood up slowly and began to walk down the stairs. His flashlight cut through the darkness, showing him more concrete walls, more stairs, going deeper than he had expected. This was not a small shelter. This was something bigger. He counted 50 steps before he reached the bottom and found himself in a corridor that stretched out in both directions. Danny chose left and followed the corridor. The air was cool and dry, nothing like the swamp above. His footsteps echoed off the walls. He passed several closed doors but did not stop to open them. He wanted to find the main room, the center of whatever this place was. He found it after another minute of walking, a large circular chamber with a high ceiling, and that was where everything changed. Because the equipment in this room did not look like anything from the Cold War. It did not look like anything from Earth at all. The walls were covered in symbols that Danny had never seen before, not any language he recognized. The equipment was smooth and curved, made of materials that seemed to glow faintly even without power. There were screens that looked like liquid glass. There were devices with no buttons, no switches, nothing that suggested how a human would operate them. Danny stood in the middle of the room and turned slowly, his flashlight revealing more and more things that should not exist. His first thought was that this was some kind of secret government facility, something experimental, something classified, but that explanation felt wrong even as he thought it. The design was too different, too alien, and that word stuck in his mind. Alien. Then the voice came from the darkness behind him. It spoke in perfect English, calm and clear. It said, "You should not be here, but the storm leaves you no choice. I will not harm you." Danny spun around, his flashlight sweeping across the room. His heart was pounding again, harder than during the hurricane. He saw nothing at first, just shadows and strange equipment. Then he adjusted the angle of his light, and he saw the creature standing in the corner of the room. It was tall, at least 7 feet. Its skin was smooth like stone but clearly alive. It had 4 arms, 2 on each side, hanging relaxed at its sides. Its eyes were large and dark, reflecting the flashlight beam like pools of black water. It wore something like clothing, tight and seamless, the color of deep blue. It did not move. It simply watched Danny with those enormous eyes. Danny could not speak. His mouth opened but no sound came out. His flashlight shook in his trembling hand. Every part of his mind told him to run, but his legs would not obey. He just stood there, staring at something that should not exist. The creature tilted its head slightly. It seemed to understand his fear. When it spoke again, its voice was gentle, almost kind. It said, "I have been here a very long time. I have watched your people for many generations. You are the first to find this place. I did not expect that, but I will not let you die in the storm. You may stay until it passes." Danny finally found his voice. It came out as barely a whisper. He said, "What are you?" The creature considered the question for a moment. Then it answered simply, "I am a watcher. And tonight, Danny Cole, you have found something that your world does not know exists." The hurricane screamed above them. But down here, in this impossible room, Danny stood face to face with proof that humanity was not alone in the universe. Danny did not move for a long time. His flashlight stayed pointed at the creature, and his legs felt like they were made of stone. The being stood patiently in the corner, its 4 arms hanging still at its sides, its dark eyes watching him without blinking. The silence stretched between them like a wire pulled tight. Finally, Danny forced himself to speak again. His voice was rough and shaky, but the words came out. He asked, "How do you know my name?" The creature gestured with one of its upper arms toward a smooth panel on the wall. Symbols flowed across its surface like water. It said, "I scanned your identification when you entered, your vehicle registration, your work badge. It is part of my function to understand who enters this place." Danny swallowed hard. He looked around the room again, seeing the strange equipment with new eyes, not just alien, watching equipment, recording equipment. He asked, "You said you have been watching us. For how long?" The creature moved slowly, stepping away from the corner. Danny flinched, but the being stopped when it saw his reaction. It seemed to understand that it needed to move carefully. It answered, "I arrived on your world 217 of your years ago. My name, or the closest your language can come to it, is I am what you might call an observer. I belong to a network that spans many star systems." 200 years. Danny tried to process that. This creature had been here since before the Civil War. It had watched his country tear itself apart and put itself back together. It had seen world wars and moon landings and everything in between, and no one had ever known. Danny lowered his flashlight slightly. His arm was getting tired, and some part of him was beginning to accept that if this being wanted to hurt him, it would have done so already. He asked, "Why watch us?" Moved to one of the curved panels and touched it gently. The surface came alive with images. Danny saw Earth from space, blue and white and beautiful. He saw cities growing, spreading, changing over time. He saw wars and disasters and celebrations. It was like watching a time-lapse of human history compressed into flowing images. Said, "The galaxy is very old, Danny Cole. Many species have risen and fallen. Many have reached the stars, and many have destroyed themselves before they could. The observation network exists to watch developing species, to study them, to determine what they will become." Danny stepped closer to the panel despite himself. The images were hypnotic. He watched humanity build and destroy and build again. He saw patterns he had never noticed before. He asked, "Determine what we will become. What does that mean?" Turned to face him. Its dark eyes seemed sad somehow, though Danny could not explain how he knew that. It said, "There are 2 paths for a species like yours. The first is membership. If a species proves itself capable of joining the galactic community peacefully, it is welcomed. Technology is shared. Knowledge is given. The species takes its place among the stars." Danny felt a spark of hope in his chest, but then he noticed how it paused. He asked, "And the second path?" Was quiet for a long moment. When it spoke again, its voice was softer. It said, "If a species is deemed too dangerous, it is contained. Its solar system is isolated. Its development is limited. It is prevented from spreading its violence to other worlds. It lives out its existence alone, never knowing what it missed. The hope in Danny's chest turned cold. He understood now. This was not just observation. This was judgment, he asked, and which path is humanity on? Moved to another panel and brought up more images. Danny saw atomic bombs exploding. He saw trenches filled with bodies. He saw concentration camps and burning cities and missiles pointed at the sky. He saw things he knew from history books, made real and terrible on the glowing surface. Said, "Your species invented nuclear weapons 80 years ago. You are the only species we have observed that developed such power and did not immediately destroy itself. This is noted. It suggests some capacity for restraint. But your wars continue. Your conflicts grow. You poison your own world while fighting over its pieces. The evidence is not favorable." Danny felt anger rising in his throat. He said, "That is not all we are. You are looking at the worst parts. What about the good things? What about the hospitals and the schools and the people who help each other?" Tilted its head, it said, "These things are also noted. Your species is a contradiction. You show great cruelty and great kindness, often at the same time. This makes assessment difficult. My people abandoned war 1,000,000 years ago. We cannot understand why you continue to practice it when you clearly understand its cost." Danny shook his head. He said, "I do not know if I can explain it either, but we are trying. We are getting better. Slowly, but we are trying." Studied him for a long moment. Then it said, "You believe this. I can see that you believe it, but belief is not evidence. My report must be based on what I have observed, not on what one human wishes were true." Danny felt the weight of those words. One human. That was all he was. One person standing in front of 200 years of observation trying to argue for his entire species. It seemed impossible, but he had to try. He pulled out his phone. The screen was cracked from his fall, but it still worked. There was no signal down here, but his photos were still saved. He opened his gallery and began scrolling. He said, "You have watched us from a distance, hidden in this bunker looking at data and images, but you have never been with us. You have never seen what we do when no one is watching." He held up the phone and showed a picture. It was from a flood 2 years ago. Volunteers in small boats pulling strangers from rooftops. People they had never met, risking their lives for people they would never see again. He showed another picture. Firefighters running into a burning building. Then another. Doctors working through the night during a disease outbreak. Then another. Ordinary people forming a human chain to pull a drowning child from a river. Danny said, "This is also what we are. When disaster comes, we run toward it, not away. We save strangers. We rebuild what is broken. We give everything we have to people we do not know. That is also humanity." Looked at the images for a long time. Its 4 hands twitched slightly, a gesture Danny could not interpret. Finally it said, "These images are compelling, but they are selected by you. They show what you want me to see." Danny lowered the phone. He said, "Maybe, but your data is also selected. You watch the wars and the violence because those are the big events. You do not see the small moments. The neighbor who brings food to a sick friend. The teacher who stays late to help a struggling student. The stranger who stops to help someone with a flat tire. Those moments do not make your observation reports, but they are the truth of who we are." Was quiet for a very long time. The hurricane still roared above them, shaking the bunker slightly with its power. Finally, the creature spoke. It said, "I will add your testimony to my report. Your perspective will be noted. But I must be honest with you, Danny Cole. One human's words will not outweigh 2 centuries of observation." Danny nodded slowly. He had not expected to win this argument, but he had planted a seed. That was something. Above them, the storm continued its fury. And in the bunker below, a man and an alien stood together in the glow of strange lights, each trying to understand the other. The hours passed slowly in the bunker. Danny sat on the cool concrete floor with his back against the wall, watching move between the strange panels and screens. The alien worked silently, its 4 hands moving across surfaces that glowed at its touch. Danny could not understand what it was doing, but he watched anyway. There was nothing else to do but wait for the storm to pass. After a while, turned to look at him. It said, "You should rest. The hurricane will continue for many more hours. Your body requires sleep." Danny shook his head. He said, "I could not sleep right now even if I wanted to. My mind is too full. I just found out that aliens are real and that humanity is being judged. Sleep is not coming anytime soon." Seemed to consider this. Then it moved closer and lowered itself to the floor, folding its long legs beneath it. The movement looked strange but practiced, like it had done this many times before. It said, "Then we will talk. Perhaps you have more questions." Danny almost laughed. He said, "I have a million questions. I do not know where to start." Waited patiently. Its dark eyes reflected the soft glow from the panels around the room. Danny thought about everything he had seen and heard in the past few hours. Then he asked the question that had been growing in his mind. He said, "What happens to us if we fail? If we are contained? What does that actually mean?" It was quiet for a moment. Then it said, "Your solar system would be surrounded by a barrier that your species could not see or detect. Any spacecraft you sent beyond a certain distance would simply stop working. Your signals would not leave. No other species would be allowed to contact you. You would exist in isolation forever, never knowing why." Danny felt cold despite the comfortable temperature of the bunker. He asked, "And we would never know. We would just think we were alone." Nodded. It said, "That is part of the containment. A species that believes it is alone is less likely to unite and attempt to break free. Many contained species develop philosophies that embrace their solitude. They never know what they are missing." Danny stared at the floor. He thought about all the scientists searching for signals from other worlds, all the telescopes pointed at the stars, all the people who dreamed of making contact. The idea that it could all be for nothing, that the answer might be silence by design, made his stomach turn. He looked up he said, "How many species have been contained?" Hesitated. Then it answered, "In the history of the observation network, approximately 400 species have been assessed as too dangerous. Of those, 312 were contained. The others destroyed themselves before the decision could be made." Danny closed his eyes. He said, "And how many have been welcomed? How many passed the assessment?" Said, "Approximately 2,000 species have been granted membership over the past several million years. The galaxy is large. There is room for many civilizations." Danny opened his eyes. 2,000 species among the stars, working together, sharing knowledge, and 400 locked away in darkness, never knowing the universe had passed them by. He understood now why this mattered so much. This was not just about survival. This was about everything humanity might become. He asked what would make the difference, what could change the assessment. Rose and moved to one of the panels. It touched the surface and brought up more images. Danny saw graphs and charts that he could not understand, lines and symbols that meant nothing to him. Said, "The assessment is based on patterns, trends in behavior over time. If a species shows consistent movement toward peace and cooperation, the projection becomes favorable. If the patterns remain destructive, containment is recommended." Danny stood up and walked closer to the panel. He studied the charts even though he could not read them. He said, "So it is not about being perfect. It is about getting better." Turned to look at him. Something in its expression shifted, though Danny could not say exactly what. It said, "That is correct. No species is perfect. Even my own people have history we are not proud of. The question is whether a species can learn from its mistakes and change." Danny felt a small spark of hope return. He said, "We are changing. I know it does not look like it sometimes. I know the news is always full of wars and hate, but I have seen the other side too. I have seen people come together after disasters. I have seen communities heal after violence. We are not the same species we were 100 years ago." Said, "Your words have passion, but passion is not proof. The observation network requires evidence." Danny started to respond, but then he stopped. He heard something. A faint sound barely audible over the muffled roar of the hurricane above. He held up his hand and listened. It was a voice. Very distant, very weak, but definitely a voice. He reached into his pack and pulled out his emergency radio. He had forgotten about it in all the chaos. He turned the dial slowly, searching for the signal. Static filled the room, mixed with fragments of words. Then the voice came through clearly. It was a woman speaking fast and scared. She said, "If anyone can hear this, we are trapped. Our house is flooding. We are on Pine Ridge Road, about 3 miles south of the old mill. We have 2 children. Please, if anyone can hear this, we need help." Danny looked at, the alien was watching him with those dark, unblinking eyes. Danny said, "That is close, maybe 3 miles from here." Said, "The hurricane is still at full strength. The eye may pass over this area in approximately 40 minutes, but even then you would have less than an hour before the back wall of the storm arrives. It would be extremely dangerous to leave this shelter." Danny was already reaching for his pack. He said, "I heard what you said, But there are children out there, a family. They will drown if no one helps them. Move to block the corridor. Its four arms spread slightly, not threatening but present. It said, "You cannot help them if you are dead. The mathematical probability of you reaching them and returning safely is less than 15%. Those are not acceptable odds." Danny looked up at the creature. He said, "I understand the math, but I am going anyway." Stared at him. Something in its expression changed again. It looked almost confused. It said, "I do not understand. You have explained that humans value survival. You have argued that your species is worth saving. Yet now you choose to risk your life for strangers you have never met. This is contradictory." Danny shouldered his pack. He looked directly in those dark eyes. He said, "No, this is exactly what I have been trying to explain. We are not brave because we do not feel fear. We are brave because we feel the fear and we go anyway. We save strangers because that is who we are. That is what makes us worth saving." He moved past and started toward the corridor that led back to the stairs. His heart was pounding. His hands were shaking, but his feet kept moving. Behind him stood completely still, watching him go. The alien observer had witnessed 2 centuries of human behavior from this hidden bunker, but it had never seen anything quite like this. Danny climbed the stairs toward the bunker door. His flashlight cut through the darkness and his boots echoed on the concrete steps. Above him, he could hear the hurricane still raging. The sound was different now, though, not as steady. The eye of the storm was approaching. He reached the door and put his hand on the cold metal. He took a deep breath. He knew the odds. He knew he might not come back. But somewhere out there, a family was drowning, and he was the only one who had heard their call. Then he heard footsteps behind him, heavy and slow but coming closer. He turned and saw climbing the stairs, its body moving with careful precision. The alien carried something in its upper hands, a small device that pulsed with soft blue light. Danny said, "What are you doing?" Reached the top of the stairs and stood beside him. It said, "I am violating every protocol my species has maintained for 1,000,000 years. I am leaving my observation post. I am revealing myself to additional humans. I am participating directly in the events I was sent to observe." Danny stared at the creature. He said, "Why?" Looked at the door, then back at Danny. It said, "Because I have watched your species for 200 years. I have recorded wars and cruelty and destruction. But I have never stood beside a human who runs into a hurricane to save strangers. I have never witnessed such a moment from the inside. If I am to complete my report honestly, I must understand this part of you as well." Danny did not know what to say. He simply nodded. Then he pushed open the door. The wind nearly knocked them both down. But it was weaker now, the strange calm at the edge of the eye finally arriving. The rain had stopped, though the clouds above still churned in massive circles. They had maybe 45 minutes before the back wall of the storm hit. Danny started moving immediately. He had studied the area during his field work. He knew roughly where Pine Ridge Road was. Followed, its long legs covering ground quickly despite the flooded terrain. Water reached up to Danny's waist in places, and the mud beneath tried to pull off his boots with every step. They moved through broken trees and scattered debris. The damage was terrible. Houses torn apart, cars overturned, power lines down everywhere. Danny tried not to look too closely. He tried not to think about who might be trapped inside all those ruined buildings. After 15 minutes of hard walking, they heard voices, crying, a child's voice calling for help. Danny pushed through a tangle of fallen branches and saw the house. It was barely standing, tilted at an angle where the foundation had been undercut by flooding. Water rose halfway up the first floor windows. On the second floor, faces pressed against the glass. Danny shouted, "We are here. We are going to get you out." The door was underwater. Danny dove down and tried to force it open, but the pressure from the water inside made it impossible. He came up gasping. The family was trapped on the second floor and the house was still sinking. Moved past him. It raised the small device in its upper hands and pointed it at the house. A beam of light shot out and the wall of the second floor simply opened. Not broken, not cut. The material just moved aside like it was made of water. The family inside screamed at the sight of the alien, but there was no time for explanations. Danny climbed through the opening. Inside he found a woman holding 2 small children, a boy and a girl, maybe 6 and 8 years old. Her husband stood in front of them, holding a broken piece of wood like a weapon. He was shaking with fear, but he did not move from his position between his family and the alien. Danny held up his hands. He said, "Please, we are here to help. We have to go now. The storm will return soon." The man looked at Danny, then back at Danny. His face was a mixture of terror and confusion. He said, "What is that thing?" Danny said, "A friend. I promise you it is a friend. Please, we need to move." The woman made the decision for everyone. She grabbed her children and pushed past her husband. She said, "Sam, we do not have time for this. Pick up Emma. I have got Jake. Move." Sam hesitated for one more moment, looking at. The alien stood completely still, its dark eyes watching the family with an expression Danny could not read. Then Sam lowered his weapon and picked up his daughter. He said, "Lead the way." They climbed out through the opening had made and dropped into the water below. It was chest deep on Danny, which meant the children had to be carried. Held Jake on her hip while Sam lifted Emma onto his shoulders. They started moving toward higher ground, walking ahead to clear a path through the debris. The sky was changing. The clouds were starting to move faster. The calm was ending. Danny pushed harder, urging everyone to move as fast as they could. His legs burned. His lungs ached, but he kept moving. Behind him, Sam struggled with his daughter on his shoulders. The man was exhausted and scared, but he never complained. He never slowed down. He just kept putting one foot in front of the other because that was what his daughter needed. Fell once going down hard into the water. Jake went under for a terrifying moment before she pulled him up, coughing and crying. She did not stop. She did not panic. She just lifted her son higher and kept walking. Danny looked at and saw that the alien was watching the family. It watched Sam carrying his daughter through the flood. It watched protecting her son with her own body. It watched the children clinging to their parents, trusting them completely even in the middle of a disaster. These were not statistics. These were not data points in an observation report. These were people, fighting with everything they had to protect the ones they loved. They reached the bunker with minutes to spare. Danny pulled open the door and everyone tumbled inside just as the wind began to howl again. The back wall of the hurricane had arrived. They were safe. Inside the bunker, the family huddled together on the floor. Sam still kept himself between his children and that same broken piece of wood clutched in his hands. He knew he had no chance against the alien. He knew the weapon was useless. But he held it anyway because protecting his family was more important than being realistic. Stood apart watching. Its four hands hung at its sides. Its dark eyes moved from face to face, studying each member of the family with new intensity. Danny sat down heavily, exhausted beyond words. He looked at and asked quietly, "What are you thinking?" Did not answer immediately. It continued watching Sam, who continued watching it. Two beings from different worlds, both ready to do whatever it took to protect what mattered to them. Finally spoke. Its voice was softer than before. It said, "In 200 years of observation, I have recorded countless acts of violence. I have documented your wars and your weapons and your capacity for destruction. But I have never been inside a moment like this. I have never watched a father stand against the unknown with nothing but a broken piece of wood and the will to protect his children." It turned to look at Danny. It said, "This was not in any observation file. Perhaps my reports have been incomplete." Above them the hurricane raged on, but down in the bunker something had changed. The hurricane passed sometime before dawn. Danny knew because the terrible sound of the wind finally stopped, replaced by the quiet drip of water and the distant calls of confused birds. He had dozed against the wall for a few hours, too exhausted to stay awake. When he opened his eyes, the bunker was quiet and still. The family was sleeping in a corner, had curled around both children, her body forming a protective shell even in sleep. Sam sat against the wall beside them, his eyes closed but his hand still resting on that broken piece of wood. Even unconscious, he was ready to defend them. Stood in the center of the room, motionless before one of the glowing panels. Danny watched the alien for a moment before speaking. He asked quietly, "Did you sleep?" Did not turn around, it said, "My species does not require sleep in the way yours does. I have been preparing my report." Danny stood up slowly, his muscles aching from the night's exertions. He walked over to stand beside the alien. On the panel before them, symbols flowed in patterns he could not understand. He asked, "What will you say?" Was quiet for a long moment. Then it touched the panel and the symbols disappeared, replaced by an image of Earth floating in the darkness of space. It said, "I have observed humanity for 217 years. In that time, I have documented 37 major wars, 12 genocides, and the development of weapons capable of destroying all life on your planet. By every standard measure used by the observation network, your species should be classified as too dangerous for membership in the galactic community. Danny felt his heart sink. He had hoped that the events of last night had changed something. He had hoped that showing who humans really were would make a difference. But continued speaking. It said, however, I have also observed something that does not fit the standard measures. I have seen a man run into a hurricane to save strangers. I have seen a father stand against an unknown threat with nothing but courage. I have seen a mother shield her children with her own body. I have seen love expressed through action, not words. Turned to face Danny. Its dark eyes seemed different somehow, less distant than before. It said, my people abandoned violence a million years ago. We evolved beyond it. We cannot understand why your species continues to practice war and cruelty when you clearly know the cost. This has always confused us, but last night I began to understand something. Danny asked what? Said, your capacity for violence and your capacity for love come from the same source. Your willingness to fight and your willingness to sacrifice both spring from how deeply you feel. You do not have smaller emotions than my people. You have larger ones. Your anger is greater, but so is your compassion. Your fear is greater, but so is your courage. It turned back to the panel and touched it again. New symbols appeared. It said, I am recommending that humanity be granted provisional membership in the galactic community. Not because you are peaceful, you are not. Not because you are safe, you are not. But because you have something that many species lose as they evolve. You have fire in your hearts, and that fire, properly directed, may be exactly what the galaxy needs. Danny stared at the alien. He could barely process the words. He said, you are recommending that we pass. Said, it is only a recommendation. The final decision will be made by the full network, but my voice carries weight. I have been an observer for 12,000 years. My assessments are taken seriously. Danny did not know what to say. He looked back at the sleeping family. Sam had woken up and was watching them, his hand still on the broken piece of wood. Danny thought about everything that man had done last night, carrying his daughter through a flood, standing against an alien with nothing but a stick and pure determination. That was humanity. That was what mattered. Move toward the corridor. It said, I must leave now. My cover has been compromised. Too many humans have seen me. I will be reassigned to another observation post in another part of the galaxy. Danny followed the alien toward the stairs. He said, wait, what happens now? What are we supposed to do? Stopped at the bottom of the staircase. It turned to face Danny one last time. It said, live your lives, love your families, run into hurricanes to save strangers. Keep being exactly what you are. The galaxy will be watching. Do not make me regret my recommendation. Then it climbed the stairs and disappeared through the door. Danny ran after it, but when he emerged into the morning light, there was nothing there. Just debris and flooded land, and the quiet aftermath of the storm was gone. 3 months passed. Danny went back to his normal life, though nothing felt normal anymore. He thought about that night constantly. Sometimes he wondered if he had imagined the whole thing. But then he would remember the feel of alien technology beneath his fingers, the sound of his voice, the way those dark eyes had studied him. It had been real. The family had agreed to keep the secret, and Sam had sat their children down and explained that what they had seen must stay private. The kids had accepted it with the easy flexibility of the young. They called the tall friend and sometimes drew pictures of it, which quickly hid. One evening, Danny came home to find a package on his doorstep. There was no return address, no postage. It had simply appeared. Inside was a small device made of the same smooth material as the bunker equipment and a note written in perfect English. The note said, the assessment is complete. Your species has been granted provisional membership in the galactic community. You will not be contained. My people do not understand humans, but I recommended that we learn. The galaxy is watching, Danny Cole. Do not make me regret my report. Danny held the device in his hands. He did not know what it did or how it worked, but he understood what it meant. Somewhere out there, among the billions of stars, humanity had passed a test it never knew it was taking. They had been judged not by their wars or their weapons, but by the small acts of courage that no observation post could fully capture. He walked outside and looked up at the sky. The stars were just beginning to appear in the fading light. Somewhere up there was watching another world making another assessment. And somewhere up there, Doors were beginning to open. Danny thought about his grandfather, who had always believed that humans were destined for the stars. The old man had died before seeing any proof, but he had been right. They were not alone. They never had been. The stars looked different now. They looked like a neighborhood, distant and strange, but full of neighbors waiting to be met. Humanity had taken its first step into a larger universe, and it had started with one man running into a hurricane to save people he did not know. Danny smiled and went back inside. There was work to be done. There always was, but now that work meant something different. Every act of kindness, every moment of courage, every sacrifice made for strangers was part of proving that report had been correct. The galaxy was watching, and humanity had something to prove.